In Child Life, we talk a lot about how resilience isn't an innate skill, just in the way that parenting isn't an innate skill. You're not born knowing exactly how to parent, or you're not born knowing exactly the best coping style for you. It's a muscle you have to flex, and something that for these families is challenged constantly.
I saw it at the hand washing station at the entrance of the NICU. I see it in the playroom during medical play bingo. I see it near the fish tank in the surgery waiting room. There is a powerful unspoken language between two parents who have never met, but know in their deepest soul what the inside of a children's hospital feels like. It is joy and it is grief. It is love and it is fear. It is miracles and it is loss. This podcast exists to tell these stories. I'm Katie Taylor, a very proud child life specialist, and it is my honor to be your host of Inside the Children's Hospital. Hello, my friends. I'm so happy to be with you today. Today, I get to have an interview with another child life specialist. Yay, tiny child life dance. No, but in all seriousness, you're going to want to stick around for this because we're talking all about the conversation that parents have with their kids when they end up having a physical difference. So whether it be the loss of hair from chemo or a scar from a burn, a scar from a surgery, a limb difference, how can parents navigate that conversation? What are the right words to use? When is the right time to have it? What do we want to teach our kids and how to respond when other kids or adults look and stare? Abby has been a child life specialist for 13 years. She has worked in the ICU, trauma, burn, cardiac. She's done everything in between and now owns her own private practice in the New England area called Little Lighthouses Child Life Services. So she is more than equipped to help so many parents. And I learned myself something that I didn't know before that is very important in these conversations. And we talk all about that today. Thanks so much for being here. And I'm so grateful that you're here. Let's get to our conversation with Abby.
I'm Abby. I've been a child life specialist now for about 13 years. I've worked in a variety of settings, including pediatric ICU, general inpatient settings, surgical settings, burn, rehab, cardiology. So, kind of a smattering of things at several different children's hospitals. I currently live in Boston with my husband and my 2-year-old daughter and our dog. We have lived a lot of East Coast places, the Midwest, and yeah, are happy to be back in the Northeast with family and friends. So,
I love it. Well, you have such a diverse background, trauma, burn, ICU. I feel like some of really difficult cases and experiences for families. How do you think that's shaped you as a child life specialist?
yeah, I feel like I had a really particular idea when I finished internship of I think what I thought my career would look like, and it's so interesting how life and other things have led me in so many different unexpected directions. I feel like each role has really helped me lean into different areas of our practice as child life specialists. I think spending time in a surgical setting really helped me learn to develop rapport quickly with kids and families and appreciate just how invasive I think a lot of things that people can at times minimize as maybe not a big deal. Like, I think, for instance, tonsils and adenoids are a very common thing for kids to come into a surgical setting for. That's a big deal to a lot of families that come into the hospital. Fast forward to, more of an ICU setting, I think it's made me appreciate just how earth-shattering accidents can be and how halting they can be for families, how a new diagnosis can completely turn the world on its axis. So I think more than anything, the variety of settings has always challenged me to consider what's unique to each family in that each family's experience is always going to be different and the impact is going to be felt in different ways.
It's so true. I often feel that way about like the tonsils and adenoids thing because if you talk to any adult, Like, that was a core memory for them.
Yeah,
Either in,
definitely.
like, a good way or a bad way.
Yeah.
And, like, that seems like it would be so different than a family's ICU experience, but for a child life specialist, a lot of our skills end up transferring.
Yes.
And you work with patients who spend not days, not even weeks, but months in the same room waiting for
Yeah.
transplant. And
Mhm.
it's not the normal, like, hi, I'm Abby. This is what I'm here for. Like, you're developing real relationships with these families.
No, I think that's true, and I think the unique thing about longer term hospitalizations is that, I think there's a bit of like a novel period where families are settling in and getting used to the hospital setting. If you're in a well supported hospital, there's a lot of programming and things to participate in that feel new and different and exciting. New opportunities are coming your way. And then, several months in, the reality of living in the hospital is hard. And I think there's a bit of a cycle that understandably families go through in the sense of um, every day kind of feels like Groundhog Day. And oftentimes I feel and have noticed that families who are in the hospital for that long, there's often just one thing they're waiting on, right? And in the case of transplant, you're waiting, for an organ, and there's no telling when that organ might come. It might come tomorrow, it might come months from now. So that in itself is a really unique experience because there's no predictability to that. There's no goalpost that you can visualize. It's just one day soon it's going to happen. And so I think sitting with families in that has been a really, for me, humbling experience of the true, I think, definition of what resilience looks like. Because in child life,
Mm.
we talk a lot about how resilience isn't an innate skill, just in the way that parenting isn't an innate skill. You're not born knowing exactly how to parent, or you're not born knowing exactly the best coping style for you. It's a muscle you have to flex, and something that for these families is challenged constantly. It's an ever moving target in addition to this target of waiting for an organ. So,
Mm. You talk a lot about kind of that in hospital programming, and there are things going on and people to meet and, new faces to see.
mhm,
And then you either get discharged because it's time to go home or you get your heart, whatever it looks like. But then there's that piece after hospitalization where the support and the programs end and the bingo in the playroom and
mhm.
Abby coming by to say hello is over. And is that why you decided to start child life beyond the hospital walls? How do you feel about that kind of post-discharge or post-hospitalization period for families?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. For me, I think in the breadth of my career as a child life specialist, I've seen just how hard we work with families and walk alongside them to get them to that discharge date. And then oftentimes, for many of these families, it feels like the ground kind of falls out from underneath them walking out the doors of the hospital. And that if they live in a more rural area further away from the hospital and are followed by, maybe a hospital they're not as familiar with, or they're just kind of done with the whole hospital experience in general, maybe they aren't as connected to psychosocial support as they were in the hospital. We also know that a lot of families, maybe they know that they need that support, but asking for help is harder because you don't have people swinging by your door to just check in and say, "How are you today?" So taking that extra step as they're adjusting back to life outside of the hospital is hard. So I know that there's a need there, and I think many people feel that way. So my hope is that transitioning, into this community setting and into private practice, I can help fill that gap.
And I think so much too, like, families are sitting there dreaming about the day when they're home,
Mhm. Yeah.
just waiting. And then you get there and you're like, oh, this is not, I mean, I'm home and that's everything I thought I wanted.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's just so challenging. So I'm so grateful to have another child life specialist in the community and helping families through that. But you and I decided that we were going to talk about the physical differences that kids have, whether it be from an accident,
Mhm.
surgery, a limb difference, a disability,
Uh-huh.
something that makes them look different when
Mhm.
someone sees them. Um, let's start off with, let's say, the family that comes in and there's some sort of accident or
Mhm.
trauma that leads to a physical difference
Mhm.
from here on out. How do you normally see families react to that, and how do you support them?
Yeah. I feel that more often than not, understandably, parents wanna protect their kids. I think adults often think 10 miles down the road when something like this happens, and they worry a lot about bullying and this idea of otherness, and understandably just that, one day their child was walking around looking one way and now they look another, or maybe they were born with a physical difference. There's a lot of different scenarios, but I think above all else, the initial knee jerk reaction or inclination, understandably, is just that parents want to protect their children from any feelings of less than or otherness. Um,
I
and
have
that's,
to I have to interrupt right there because
yeah.
that is the exact experience I had. My daughter had a burn on her face when she was 4. And I'm not kidding you, driving to the emergency room with her in the back, do you know what I was thinking? I was like, "Oh, she'll be the high school cheerleader with the burn
Mhm,
scars on her face." Like,
mhm.
that's how far forward I went, even
Yeah.
though that was not rational.
Right.
She healed, but you're exactly right. It's like, as parents, we go so far, so fast to, like, worst case and not that that would be the worst case in any means, but just, like, what the future holds.
Yeah, of course. And it makes total sense. And I think that's why as often the child life specialist who steps in to kind of start to dip our toes in the water of talking about how to help kids feel most comfortable in their bodies and prepared to be out in the community, whether it be like a small physical difference that's under their shirt, like a surgical scar, or, a burn, like you're saying, that's on your face. Adults really, I think, just maybe at times struggle with this idea that, um, not talking about it understandably makes it more taboo than talking about it.
Yeah.
We know through a lot of research and just, I think, anecdotally that kids are curious and are going to ask questions. So, with a physical difference, it's best to kind of think of it and explain it to kids as, you know, when someone is staring, majority of the time when they're staring, it's usually just an unanswered question. Like if I'm staring at you, Katie, from across the room, but we're too far away, or maybe I'm feeling shy, I'm staring at you and you're like, oh, this is making me feel kind of like, why is she staring at me kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you're like, "Do I have something in my teeth? Like, what's going on?" When in reality, I'm staring at you because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, I really like Katie's shirt. Like, I wonder where she got it." So,
Yeah.
and not to obviously by any means minimize a physical difference to, like, staring at your shirt, but
Yeah.
I think phrasing it more as, kids often stare because they're curious, and we know that school age kids, for instance, like they might be worried or concerned, like, oh, I notice, my friend Sally, who's returned back to the classroom, she had hair and now she doesn't have hair. Is my hair going to fall out? Or, um, so that idea of like, can I catch what this person has? Um, I think kind of gets folded into that as well. So rather than the adults on either side, right? So say you're in the grocery store and your child notices a physical difference about someone else, not making it taboo to ask the question, but also explaining this idea that the person may not want to talk about it, and that's okay too.
Mm.
So it's kind of protecting the emotional safety of both parties involved, right? Like it's okay to ask the question, and it's also okay for the person to either answer that question or say, I don't really feel like talking about that right now. And that doesn't mean that your question was wrong. It just means they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. I can see that. Like, we hear all the time parents saying, like, no, don't look, don't ask questions, don't
Mhm,
stare.
mhm.
And again, like you said, it's well-meaning,
Yeah,
it's to protect the other child, or so they think.
right.
And so what is the best thing to teach, I guess, people who do see someone with a difference?
Yeah, I think, there's a good mindset that it's always okay to ask. Um, so, on the side of the person with the physical difference, something that we talked a lot about in the burn community that I feel like they do a really nice job helping empower survivors to tell their story. So, survivors are often armed with what you can think of as like a 5 cent versus a $5 story. So, sort of a short, condensed version like, "Hi, my name is Abby. I got burned in a house fire. Do you wanna go play with blocks with me?" So that's like my short version. My longer version might be, "My name's Abby. I got burned in a house fire with my mom and my dad. I was in the hospital for a long time and I had a lot of surgeries. I'm okay now. Thanks for asking." Um, or
Okay.
sort of like we talked about this third category of, "I don't really wanna talk about it right now. Thanks for asking." And so I think on the other side, kind of like you're asking, if there's another child who notices a physical difference, just encouraging that it's okay to politely ask, like, "Oh, I noticed your scar on your face," and not asking, I guess, in a blunt way, like, "What happened to you?" or, things like that. So encouraging the questions, but maybe phrasing it in a way of curiosity and not accusatory, if that makes sense.
And now a word from our amazing sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Moog Medical. I want to share a story from one of our own Child Life On Call team members, Lindsay, because her experience truly shows what makes Moog stand out. As both a professional and a parent, Lindsay knows the world of pediatric healthcare. When her own son needed enteral feeding, she chose the Moog Infinity Pump, and the difference it made for her family was incredible. One of the things Lindsay appreciated most was the customization of alerts. Instead of the overwhelming alarms or confusing notifications, she was able to tailor the pump's alerts in a way that supported her son's needs and reduced stress at home. She often talks about how much calmer and more manageable feedings become once she could personalize the settings. And then there's the design. The Moog Infinity Pump is lightweight, sleek, and easy to carry, which matters so much more than you realize until you're using it every single day. Lindsay loved that it didn't add bulk or frustration to her son's routine, and as a mom on the go, the simplicity and portability made a world of difference. And something that gave her even more peace of mind was Moog's 24/7 customer care line. Knowing that real support was always available, day or night, meant she never had to troubleshoot alone. For a parent managing medical needs around the clock, that kind of dependable access makes all the difference. As part of our Child Life On Call team, Lindsay is proud to share her positive experience with other caregivers and professionals who want equipment that truly supports the child and family. To learn more about the Moog Infinity Pump and the full line of enteral feeding solutions, visit moogmedical.com. That's MOOG medical.com. When do you think is the right time for parents who know their child is or going to have a physical difference or already has one to equip them with these? I love that 5 cent, $5. No, I don't want to talk about it. Like, okay, one,
Mhm.
two, three. I can think about that. When is the right time to bring that up with their child?
So this maybe sounds surprising, but I feel like the earlier you can model it, the better. So, obviously, for our younger populations that are just developing language, modeling it in front of them. So, not necessarily answering for them, but if they notice someone staring, being like, "Oh, this is Jessica. Jessica was burned in a fire, but she's okay now. Thanks for asking." And just kind of hearing that repetition of how they answer that question. And as they get older, I think the hardest thing, understandably, for parents, and even for me as a new professional when I was working with burn population survivors, was just taking a beat and giving the kid a second to answer for themselves. Because I had a really impactful experience where a burn survivor explained this story to me where they talked a lot about how they had this experience in a mall where, people were staring and well-intentioned older siblings kind of stepped in and felt very protective and, said, "Well, what are you staring at?" And kind of, felt protective and reacted.
Yeah.
Um, and when she recalled about that experience, she said, I felt really loved and cared for, but I also felt really embarrassed because I wasn't really given the opportunity to like just name that it sucked that people were staring at me or answer the question for myself like I'd been working on or anything like that. So, in the same way, I think parents it's we want to like again protect and jump in and so giving kids a beat to answer for themselves as they start to get older. I think coaching at home can be helpful and I know that if it feels hard at home and maybe parents feel like they need a little bit of extra support, leaning on the psychosocial professionals in your life, like child life specialists, like psychologists, like social workers, who can help maybe gently nudge that conversation forward. Because the reality is, their physical difference more than likely isn't going to go away. I mean, there are some cases, obviously, where, for instance, obviously, kids who are going through oncology treatment, their hair will grow back. Um, but they need the opportunities to have time to build their confidence and feel empowered to answer those questions because maybe they decide they might want to make a joke out of it or maybe they
Yeah.
decide you know they want to interweave it in their story in a different way and I think understanding that like adults there's some days where they're going to be higher energy and have more capacity to deal with that and then there's some days where they're going to be lower energy and they're just going to know that in their back pocket they can say, "I'm sorry, I don't really wanna talk about that right now, but thanks for asking."
Yeah. And these can apply to, you've mentioned, a physical difference, like not having
Mhm.
your hair from chemotherapy,
Yeah.
a limb difference because you're born with it, or a scar after a surgery. All of these kind of things apply with letting the child have a beat to share their story. That's just helpful advice all the way around.
Mhm.
Not even like with this specific, but I find myself like even with my son like tying his shoes, like I so badly just want to intervene
Yeah.
and tie it correctly,
Yeah.
but I just need to let him struggle and figure it out sometimes, and that
Mhm.
can feel extra painful when they're answering a question about something physical on their body, but
Yeah.
is equally as important for that struggle or moment to allow them the capacity to try out what their script will be.
Yeah, I agree, and I think something important to name too is that, like, we know that curiosity at times and I feel like this is the minority, understandably, it's every parent's, like, worst fears that sometimes it could turn into bullying, but a big part of this conversation is looping in your child's educators and other people that are around them maybe during the day when you're not, and helping arm them with responses of when to intervene and when to not, but also helping your child understand and giving them the opportunities to build confidence around telling their story. And there's a lot of research around, you know, oftentimes maybe bullies get their empowerment from the reaction, so maybe not giving them a reaction. There's lots of resources and ways to deal with it when it happens, but my experience has been that oftentimes it's kids' curiosity rather than bullying.
Abby, I know you're in the New England area, so you see families. Do you also see families virtually, maybe for that parent who is listening to this and is like, okay, I want to talk to Abby. I want to see if she can help me help my child navigate that 5 cent, $5
Yeah,
response
no,
and
I think
encourage.
this particular conversation, I think it's a long-term conversation. It's a long-term muscle that's developed over time. So, yes, I'm always happy to talk with parents virtually. And I think the thing about it is it looks different at each developmental stage. So, like we talked about, those younger kiddos, it's doing a lot more modeling for school age. It's doing a lot more, giving them opportunities. And maybe when they're teens, it's really helping them build that story in a way that they're forming their own identity and how they want to weave it into who they are as an emerging young adult. So, um, yeah, always happy to chat with parents virtually about this.
I love that. And I'm reminded about so many situations with teens, especially who can turn to humor as like a coping skill.
Mm.
So if they see a physical difference or a scar, they're like, oh, yeah, that was a shark bite. And
Yeah,
really, it was a
exactly.
cardiac
Exactly.
surgery.
Or like, "You should see the other guy," or like,
Yeah.
something, right? Like, I think the more so when we were talking about that 5 cent $5 story, the important part of ending it with like a "thanks for asking" or kind of like an upbeat piece is to let the other person know, like, um that it's not a taboo thing to talk about. And I'm
Mm.
still like an approachable person who enjoys the same things that you do, like playing outside or chocolate chip cookies or, whatever speaks to that particular kid. So that little twist at the end and obviously humor as well, I think just reminds the other person that I enjoy all the same things you do.
Oh, I love that. That's an important part that I didn't know, but absolutely is like kind of the period at the end of the sentence. Because if
Mm.
we end with like, "Oh, this happened, period," that doesn't feel very approachable, and what you want is for your child to have peers and friends and feel comfortable talking about it, so I love that.
Yeah, and I think the thing that we know as child life specialists, especially for a lot of younger kids, is that that might be the last time that conversation happens because they're on to the next thing. Like,
Sure.
for toddlers and preschoolers, it's like when we talk a lot about, death and bereavement conversations, like there's almost this beautiful, I don't want to say naive, but simplistic nature to these conversations because they're short, concrete, and simple. They might happen multiple times at random points, but it's often short and sweet and it's accepted. It's like, okay, you know, Abby
Yeah,
was burned in a house fire or Abby had to have surgery, but she's okay now and she wants to play outside with me and this is great. So I think
yeah.
there's a beauty in that oftentimes as adults we again like can jump 3 steps ahead, but kids I think have this beautiful just like zone of accepting things as they are, as they're being presented in front of them, as long as those questions are being answered.
I love that. This is one of my favorite questions to ask someone like you because I feel like you're a dreamer like me and you like to think big, but if you had that magic wand moment, what would that be and what would it look like for you?
I think since becoming a parent, and I think just the depth and breadth of my experiences in the hospital, I feel like parents are always doing a better job than they're giving themselves credit for. And it's a really hard thing to tell yourself as a parent. But oftentimes I feel like there's many cases where there families just need an opportunity and an outlet to talk something and process something out with someone. But I think of a lot of experiences where parents explain everything that they've been doing, and I reflect back to them what they're doing and, often have, some insight to add as far as our lens and psychosocial things that we know just because of our education and experience. But that often they're doing all the right things and the intention is in the right place. So, sort of like this conversation where we've talked about how and when, and those are all questions understandably parents ask. But I think at the end of the day, it's how supported your child feels while you're having the conversation, not necessarily that you have exactly the right words at exactly the right time. Because there's a lot of research out there, obviously, that shows that it's not so much that you reacted exactly the right way at that moment. If you didn't react or you've thought about it more, you can always come back to your child and say, I thought about this more, what you said, and X, Y, and Z, or I'm sorry I reacted that way, or, um, I hope you know that you can always ask me questions about X, Y, and Z. So at the end of the day, all parents want their child to feel loved and supported. And so they're doing more good than I think they ever give themselves credit for. So I think if I had a magic wand, it would that be that more parents give themselves more credit for the amazing job that they're doing already. And
Oh,
I think just the amount of time that I've spent with parents in their lowest of lows and some of the things that they've come out with as far as like thinking of others or things that they've thought about for their child. It's beautiful, and I don't know that parents give themselves enough credit for that. So
I love that. Well, where can people find you and either book a session with you or just learn from you? Where's the best place to get in touch?
yeah, so I have a website. It's Little Lighthouses Child Life Services. Also on Instagram, Little Lighthouses Child Life. But yeah, I have a contact page on my website, so you can always reach out. That way, my email's listed there. I have a phone number as well if you'd rather chat on the phone, but those are the best places to find me.
I love it. And tell me the origin story of Little Lighthouses.
Yeah. So I feel often, sort of like we talked about, that when families leave the hospital, they maybe need that touchstone of support or just like knowledge that someone is out there if they need something. And we often say as child life specialists, the goal is never that you're codependent on our services or us for life. It's more just that we're there if we need you. So obviously, lighthouses are this, sort of port in the storm or beacon if you need it and shows you the way back home. So that was kind of the idea and the mission behind Little Lighthouses.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Abby, for being here. I so appreciate it.
Thank you.
For those of you who are joining us today, I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I am a child life specialist. And the suggestions and tips and resources that I talk about with parents on this podcast may be great for you and they may not be right for you. So, the most important person you can talk to about getting support is your care team, your doctor who knows your story and your child's story. So, regardless of maybe what I mention or what other families mention here, we're not licensed therapists, we're not doctors. We're having a conversation about what the parenting journey has been like. So, please keep that in mind as you listen today.